Hi everyone, so this screencast is to help you learn how to answer questions on the recent COAST test you've just done. So we'll kick off with question 3A, study figure 3.1 insert, which is a photograph of a part of a sand spit, and figure 3.2, an annotated sketch of a sand spit. So if we take the photograph first, I have a look at this and we'll see, actually it's just pointing, X there is just pointing to this landform. Straight away, you should be thinking, okay, what is this landform here? Look at the photograph. We've got the sea there. We've got, quite a nice sandy beach. And then we actually have sand dunes. Okay. So we go back to this first question here. The first question says, identify the type of coastal landform found at X. Go back to it. Look at X. It's sand dunes. That's the landform. That's the only answer there. Okay. Right. So going back here, it did ask you to study figure 3.2 as well. And what we have with 3.2 is an annotated sketch of a sand spit. So we can see here we've got prevailing wind direction. We've got the movement of beach material. We've got this zigzag motion. And then we've got the spit there. And then we've got the land. Okay. So let's go on to the next question anyway. Now we've studied that, we're sort of like using the two sources, but we're going to go on to the next question. Describe two characteristics of the coastal landform shown at X on 3.1. So 3.1 is the photograph. So we must go back to this and look at the characteristics. Okie dokie. So the first thing we will possibly note is that the first thing is that there is a significant amount of vegetation in the photograph. And if you can possibly identify, it's actually marram grass. And we talked about marram grass in lessons as a type of plant which can adapt to these rather harsh conditions. So, but all it's asking is you to describe. So the first thing is there is a significant amount of vegetation in the form of marram grass on the sand dune. Okay. Now, what you might notice there is I'm trying to fill at least 1.5 to 2 lines. There is a significant amount of vegetation in the form of marram grass in the photo. Okay, now I need a second point there. So the second point, let's go back, let's see what else we can see. Now we've mentioned the vegetation, a couple of points we could pick up here. We could pick up that the areas of the photograph include patches of bare sand. Okay, that would get us the mark as well. Other things we might say is the actual shape of the dunes. So we could argue that, the dunes are relatively flat with a gentle gradient. Okay, so we're getting the marks here from either describing the vegetation, the fact that there are patches of sand, or we could mention the actual gradient of the sand dunes, or the relief of the sand dunes, in that they are relatively flat with a gentle gradient. Any two of those, which are basically clearly described, would get the marks. Okie dokie. On to question 3. So question 3 is explain how coastal landform X has been formed on the spit. This is an explain question. So whereas here we're just describing, we're writing down what we see. We're using our understanding and writing down what we see. So we would box describe there. What often follows a describe question is an explain question. So we would box the explain command term and then underline how coastal landform X has been formed on the spit. Now, this has thrown a few students because all it's basically asking, if we paraphrase the question, it's just simply saying how the sand form, how the sand dunes form. That's all it's asking. How the sand dunes form. Okay, so what we have to do there, we look at the amount of marks. It's a 3-mark question. And I like to keep referring to this on your papers. I refer to step-by-step processes, SBSP. And whenever you're writing physical geography answers, you should try and visualize what's happening and write these answers in a structured form, in a step-by-step way. This happens, then that happens, and then something else happens. Okay, let's go to the photograph, because the photograph actually might be able to give us a few clues about how these occur. It won't tell us everything, but it might give us a few clues. So 3 marks, how the sand dunes occur. Number 1, an onshore wind, that's a wind that blows from the sea to the land or onshore, blows dry sand on the beach. 1 mark. The dry sand will move via processes such as sand creep and saltation. 2 marks. When the wind drops, the sand can accumulate around an obstacle such as a piece of driftwood, and this can begin the development of dunes. Okay, so that would be that would be fine for 3 marks to get us thinking about how the dunes actually start to form and they start to develop. If we skipped out any one of those, we might mention that finally over time, continued movement of sediments. Continued movement of sands, like helped create the development of sand dunes. So what we're looking at: step 1, onshore winds blow the sand. 2, when the sand is dry, it moves via processes such as sand creep and saltation. When the wind drops, the sand can deposit around an obstacle such as driftwood, seaweed, something like that, and then the continued movement of sand can help to create the development of sand dunes. And that's really all you need to do for that question. But it's thrown a few of you, I think, just because of maybe the way it's phrased. Okay, let's go back to the paper. Now, this is asking explain how a sand spit is formed. Okay, so here we need to go back to up to the top of the paper. There is a lot of clues in this diagram here regarding how this sand spit has formed. And what you've got to do is look at that, use your knowledge and understanding, and write about, step-by-step processes again for physical geography, how this forms. Okay, let's have a think about this. So, step 1, prevailing winds influence wave direction. This causes a process known as longshore drift. 1 mark. Longshore drift moves along the beach in a zigzag, moves sediment along the beach in a zigzag motion. 2nd mark. 3rd mark. When the coastline changes direction, this allows the deposition of sand in relatively shallow water. 3 marks. 4th mark. The spit can develop a recurved end if the wind changes direction. So that's all you would need to get the 4 marks. And it's not that hard, is it really? 1, reference the prevailing winds influencing wave direction, and therefore creating longshore drift, which moves the sediment along in a zigzag motion when the coastline changes direction. That's important. Coastline changes direction and the water is shallow enough, sediment will be deposited, or sand will be deposited, maybe at the mouth of a river, and then you can maybe mention the recurved end, which can form when the wind changes direction. Okie dokie. So 4 marks there for 4 clear statements regarding how the sand spit forms. Okay, on to question B here. Study 3.3 insert, which is a photograph of an area of coastline which has been affected by coastal erosion. So this is an identify command term. All you're basically doing here is saying, what's that? What's this? What's something else? In this case, we're looking at what P, Q, and R are. Okay, so let's have a look at the second photo. P. P is a stack. Okay, that's a stack. It's a coastal stack. Q is a cliff face. We can see a rather nice vertical cliff face there. R's the tricky one. And R is a wave cut platform. That's all we need to do. Identify stack, cliff, wave cut platform. That's all we're doing for that question. Okay. The 5 mark questions are sometimes difficult on examinations. This one I think is relatively straightforward. Describe the processes of coastal erosion. Basically, what it is asking you to do is describe the 4 main types of coastal erosion. So, the way to go about this would be to write down what a coastal erosion type is, and then describe how that works. So let's go through this and think about this. So one type of coastal erosion is hydraulic action. This is when the waves crash against a cliff face, compress air in cracks, creating a small explosion to break down the cliff face. Number two, a second type is corrosion, also known as abrasion. This is where the water waves pick up rocks, throw them against a cliff face, and break them down. If the rock is alkaline rock, such as chalk or limestone, the acidity in the water can dissolve the rocks in the cliff face. Rocks, furthermore, coastal erosion can occur from rocks which have been loosened from the cliff face because the waves can smash the rocks against each other via the process of attrition. Now we've got the four types of coastal erosion there. So to get the fifth mark, what we need to do is write something else. So something like might be when coastal erosion occurs, it causes the rocks to become smaller, smoother, and more rounded. Okay, that would get us our 5 marks. And on to our last question here, which is a 7-mark case study, which overall you've done pretty well on. But let me pick out a few things here which we have done wrong. Number one, so the case study asks, the question asks, for a named area of coast you have studied, describe the strategies used to manage coastal erosion. So we know all of you put down the Holderness Coast. It's the only coastline we've studied, which is correct, which is great. But this question is only asking about strategies used to manage coastal erosion. So what have you all done really well is you've described the location. We like some specifics straight away in the case study. So the first thing to say, the Holderness Coast is located in the northeast of England. It ranges from Flamborough Head, a chalk headland in the north, to Spurn Point, a spit in the south. Most of the coastline is made up of soft boulder clay, which is easily eroded with erosion rates of 1 to 2 meters per year on average. So what we've got there is a lovely introduction, the location, bit of background about the coastline, nothing too detailed, and we set the scene for like why these strategies are required. The rest of the marks are basically by referring to 4 or 5 locations along that coastline and writing about what coastal management strategies have been used. Now, some of you wrote a lot Flamborough Head because it's a chalk headland, more resistant. No key hard or soft engineering has been used. That's fine to put in there, but then just refer to 4 or 5 places. So Bridlington with its sea walls, Mappleton with its riprap groin and its riprap sea wall, Easington with its revetments, etc. And maybe just any other places that you remember, right? And all you've got to do is name those places and write about what strategies have been used. Now, what would also help, of course, is to put a little bit about how they work. Okay, so you could refer to maybe if you refer to riprap groins at Mappleton, you can say simply riprap groins are used at Mappleton as they trap sediment via longshore drift, creating a wider beach. Or seawalls have been used at Bridlington, which protect the coastline from the destructive waves. Something like that, or create a barrier between the land and the sea to protect that land from destructive waves. So it is described. So all we're doing here is writing down 4 or 5 locations, what coastal management has been used, and a little bit about that coastal management. Nothing too detailed. If you do that, you're going to pick up 7 marks for this case study. Okay, sorry, it's a little bit late when I'm doing this screencast now. I realize it's not perfect, but hopefully this will be useful. What you can also do is look at the coastal mark scheme to see exactly what the examiner is looking for.